some folks might not be open to sharing homes with people with different, political beliefs or what have you. But I do think the experience of rising housing costs, the experience of social isolation, these are pretty universal, and hopefully, and I think on a policy side, there's cost savings here, right? We're not having to build new housing. We're using it more efficiently. We are hopefully reducing the need for supports and services and early entry to nursing homes and all that sort of, on a smallish scale. But I think that's still important too for all parties.
And speaking of policy, we did just hear from the White House that there is a policy that's come out in terms of putting a cap on rental increases and also building more affordable housing and looking at federally owned land to be able to do that. I mean, do you think that this could be something helpful, or is it sort of too far out at this point to even think about, and we don't know enough about it? Of course, we have an election coming up. A lot of ifs there, but do we need federal government involvement to help with this issue as well?
Yeah, I mean, housing assistance in this country is not an entitlement. Only a quarter of families with kids, a third of older adults who are eligible for it get it. We need more help. We need more, any ways we can do that, whether it be through rental assistance or by reducing the cost of construction, using federal land, using local land for that purpose to build affordable housing. Those things are really helpful.
Are there other countries that are doing that you think we could use or look to as a potential model of what the government might be able to do to help people? So, it's not up to individuals to say, maybe I'll take a roommate or maybe I'll find one. So we can really, because does it help the housing crisis, or does it almost contribute to the problem because it doesn't cause the market to make these prices go down and to make people better able to afford mortgages and housing?
Well, I think other countries certainly provide more generous assistance. I think one of the things that we've learned in our work on aging is that other countries also provide more generous assistance with the supports and services side. And so here we're thinking, we think people talk a lot about aging in place or aging in community, and we think a lot about the housing affordability, but it's also those supports and services. And other countries have those as entitlements. We don't generally do that. And so I think for older adults and for us as a country, we have to think about the big picture. It's we're calling it a dual burden of housing and care, right? So what is that? What does that look like when you put it all together?
Right. Okay. Well, Jennifer Malinsky, Director of the Housing and Aging Society Program at Harvard University's Joint Center for Housing Studies, I want to thank you so much for being with us and talking about this potential way of dealing with the nation's housing crisis. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm Deborah Becker. This is On Point.
On Point is a production of WBUR Boston and is distributed by APM, American Public Media.
Support for On Point comes from the listeners of WBUR Boston and from MathWorks, creators of MATLAB and Simulink software for technical computing and model-based design. MathWorks, accelerating the pace of discovery in engineering and science. Learn more at mathworks.com. And Made in Cookware. Made in Cookware is crafted by chefs for chefs and designed for restaurants and home kitchens around the world. Their cookware can be found at madeincookware.com.
Thank you for listening to KUOW FM Seattle, KUOW, KUOW Tumwater, and KUOW Bellingham. Sorry about that. Coming up in a few minutes here during the noon hour, it's KUOW's Week in Review. Here to tell you more about today's show is Week in Review host Bill Radke.
Can I get a lozenge for you, Kathy?
Yeah,
You good?
definitely.
Well, I'm looking forward to the show, Week in Review. Here in just a few minutes, we'll talk about the city of Seattle moving to create no-go zones in areas known for drugs and prostitution. Also, coming up, should Seattle restaurants have to pay workers minimum wage if those workers make tips on top of that? Boeing is not HQ'd in Seattle, so how come its new CEO will be stationed here? Can we call it a comeback? We'll discuss all that, and we'll give you a reason to smile by the end of the show. I hope you'll stick around for Week in Review.
After a surge in ocean shipping rates, some relief is in sight.
The ocean freight industry is inherently a boom and bust industry because the assets last for like 30 years. You know, you buy one of these ships and it's got a really long life cycle.
I'm Amy Scott, a turbulent business, next time on Marketplace.
Marketplace, today at 2:30 and 6:30 here at KUOW.
Support for KUOW comes from BECU, a member-owned credit union putting people over profit, offering financial services and support to the community with access to local financial centers, over 30,000 ATMs, and online resources at becu.org. Federally insured by NCUA.
Hi, I'm Chris Morgan, host of The Wild. Artificial intelligence is making the stuff of science fiction science reality, changing how humans interact with the world. It can also change the way we interact with wildlife, giving us the ability to talk to animals. But are we ready? On our next episode, I chat with two leading experts about animal communication and the pros and cons of the latest AI technology. Listen to The Wild tonight at 8 or anytime on the KUOW app.
Mostly sunny skies through the weekend with highs in the mid to upper 80s. Overnight lows will be in the mid 60s. It's warming quickly this noon hour. It is currently 81. You are listening to KUOW. It's 12:01.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Janine Herbst. Vice President Harris has secured enough votes from Democratic convention delegates to become her party's nominee for president. As NPR's Tamara Keith reports, she crossed that milestone early in the virtual roll call vote process.
Democratic National Committee Chairman Jamie Harrison made the announcement during a Harris campaign live stream.
I am so proud to confirm that Vice President Harris has earned more than a majority of votes from all convention delegates and will be the nominee of the Democratic Party following the close of voting on Monday.
Harris was running unopposed, but Harrison praised the speed with which delegates cast their virtual ballots. The vice president herself then joined the call.
We are going to win this election.
But she added it's going to be a lot of work. Tamara Keith, NPR News.
The Department of Justice says it's suing the popular social media site TikTok. NPR's Windsor Johnston reports the DOJ is accusing the app of collecting data from users under the age of 13.
The lawsuit is the result of a long-running battle between the government and Chinese-owned TikTok. The complaint accuses the platform of illegally collecting children's data and allowing users under the age of 13 to create and use TikTok accounts. The lawsuit also says the site failed to honor parents' requests to delete their kids' profiles. In a statement, the Justice Department says the legal action will ensure that TikTok honors its obligations to protect children's privacy rights and parents' efforts to protect their children. The lawsuit is the latest clash between the U.S. government and TikTok, which claims to have more than 170 million users in the U.S. Windsor Johnston, NPR News, Washington.
The political leader of the Palestinian group Hamas was buried in Qatar after traditional Friday prayers that drew other exiled Hamas leaders, Qatar's ruler, and senior officials from Turkey. NPR's Aya Batrawi has more.
Hamas says Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated in a brazen Israeli attack while visiting Iran on Wednesday. Iran has vowed to avenge that strike on its soil. Haniyeh had led Hamas's political leadership from exile in Qatar. He was the lead Hamas figure in negotiations for a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, where the health ministry says the death toll is nearing at least 40,000 Palestinians killed, among them several of Haniyeh's children and grandchildren. President Biden has said his killing doesn't help those ceasefire efforts. But prominent as he was, Haniyeh ultimately wasn't the man calling the shots in those talks, nor is he believed to have spearheaded the deadly Hamas-led October 7th attacks on Israel. That would be Yahya Sinwar, Hamas's leader inside Gaza, still at large. Aya Botrawi, NPR News.
Wall Street sharply lower at this hour. The Dow is down 751 points. NASDAQ down 446. S&P 500 down 115. This is NPR.
This is KUOW News. I'm Ruby DeLuna. The Seattle City Council is considering increased penalties for drug-related crimes as well as sex trafficking. KUOW's Amy Radel reports.
The Seattle City Attorney and City Council members are seeking to pass ordinances banning people from zones of drug activity downtown or prostitution on Aurora Avenue. Council President Sarah Nelson said banning people charged with drug-related crimes from specific neighborhoods is not analogous to the war on drugs.
We're talking about misdemeanor. We're talking about gross misdemeanor. The war on drugs threw people in jail on trumped-up felonies for years and years and years.
But King County Public Defender Anita Condelwall says these exclusion zones have been tried and discarded before.
You know, we all want a safer city, and we should really spend time thinking about what's going to be an effective, evidence-based, and humane way of achieving that shared goal. And this is not it.
Seattle Police Chief Sue Rahr called the ordinances important tools to at least briefly disrupt criminal activity. Amy Radel, KUOW News.
In other news, the site of the beloved Woodinville Nursery, Mullbacks, will host Food Truck Fridays starting August 9th until October 11th. The trucks will be there weekly from 4:30 to 5:30. According to the Washington State Food Truck Association, the current property owners are trying to energize the now vacant space. Mullback Nursery and Garden Center was a staple in Woodinville for nearly 70 years, but its doors shuttered in January. And in sports, Seahawks quarterback Geno Smith again sat out yesterday's practice with apparent knee and hip injury suffered in practice on Tuesday. The Seahawks season begins on September 8th against Denver at Lumen Field. You're listening to KUOW News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Fisher Investments. As a fiduciary, Fisher Investments is obligated to act in their client's best interest. Learn more at FisherInvestments.com. Investing in securities involves the risk of loss. This is NPR.
Welcome to Friday. Welcome to KUOW's Week in Review. I'm Bill Radke here. It's back in the 70s at SeaTac Airport right now. Cooler than yesterday, and it might be partly due to wildfire smoke. So I'm told. Smoke aloft, think of it as a cloud. Don't call it smoke.
Reminds me of home.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Home is like that?
California.
Oh, okay.
Northern California.
Wildfire smoke? Yeah. Well, I'm glad we could fulfill that sort of nostalgia. But a colleague of mine said this morning that he knew, and I really related, he said that he knew it was a smoky day before he left his house because of the light in the kitchen was orangey. You know? Mm-hmm. It's like, it's not just the choking and the smelling, it's just it's orangey.
Yeah, the golden hour hits different when it's 9 a.m. Yeah.
That, by the way, that's the co-host of the Too Beautiful to Live podcast. Hi, Andrew Walsh.
Hello, thanks for having me.
And before that, you heard South Seattle Emerald reporter and writer. Hi, Lauryn Bray.
Always a pleasure, Bill.
Always. And the founder and president of Gamoran Legal Consulting is with us. Saul Gamoran, welcome back.
Hi, Bill.
You chaired the Washington State Nikki Haley for President campaign. I wanted to ask you, is Donald Trump about to ditch J.D. Vance and switch to Nikki Haley for VP?
No, he's not, and he can't.
Really?
Yeah, really.
Oh. Well, it was all that speculation I was hearing about.
Well, I mean,
if there's a rumor mill, it must be true.
No, he's not going to do that.
Legally, he can't?
No, they already voted him in at the convention, so there's nothing they can do. I think my guess is he would have liked to have had a redo had he known for sure that President Biden was not going to run, but it is what it is.
By the way, Vice President Harris is now her party's presidential nominee. She got enough pledged delegates. So she'll choose her running mate very soon. Because you were Nikki Haley's Washington State campaign chair, I assume you know who Harris is going to choose for her vice president because you all talk. There's a pipeline.
Yeah, it's a secret club, of course.
Yeah. So, will you tell us?
I'd tell you, but I'd have to kill you.
Okay, that's not worth it. It doesn't pencil out. Okay, so by the way, so let's talk local news as we do on Week in Review. Just want to let you know you can watch this program. We're watchable people. Find out for yourself on YouTube where we're live streaming the show. Just search for KUOW. Okay, local topic number 1 now from this week. Here comes that tougher on crime Seattle government. This week, the city attorney and a city council member proposed new laws on prostitution and drugs. Number 1, you could be barred from parts of downtown and the International District if you've been charged with a drug crime or a crime the city thinks is associated with drug activity. They call that a SODA zone, SODA, stay out of drug areas. The head of the Downtown Seattle Association, John Scholes, says there will be opposition. Let's see if we can play that for you.
They're going to say it's not nice or fair to the folks that are going to be impacted, to the people being arrested. They'll say very little about what is nice and fair to the barista that just quit her job at First and Pike because it's too unsafe to work there.
So that's the drug zone proposal. Under this other proposal I mentioned, you could be banned from parts of Aurora Avenue in North Seattle if you've been arrested for a prostitution-related crime. So that would be the SOPA zone, SOPA, stay out of areas of prostitution. And it would be a misdemeanor to engage in prostitution loitering and a gross misdemeanor to essentially act as a pimp, drive somebody to a prostitution zone and monitor their sex work. I'm going to start. Andrew, I didn't realize that you live in the prostitution zone. So, by the way, that's what it says in the real estate listings.
I was going to say we don't call it that.
No,
and that's not how I'm known.
No, but I live.
Yeah, no, I live directly. And by the way, it's almost a crime that you start with me on this because I'm between two people who know so much more about this from a policy standpoint.
We'll
but
get there.
From I guess a lifestyle standpoint, yeah, I live like directly. I waited for the bus today. I was looking at the sign for Stoneway, and I'm like, okay, that's exactly where it ends on the east side of the zone. I live smack dab in
85th and north up to the Seattle line, and then a little bit on either side.
And a little bit on either side. And, it is. And so I live right there, a couple blocks off of Aurora, right there around 105th. And so we see, a lot of crime in our neighborhood. One of the things that has been getting a lot of attention is like literal shootouts.
Yeah.
With,
the SPD, Seattle Police, just to highlight that, said there were 31 shooting incidents in 2 months in that zone.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to exaggerate my role in this or sort of like, exaggerate trauma or whatever, but because I haven't been near any of these, but the bus stop that I wait for, I take the E-line all the time. Me and my partner take the E-line up and down Aurora. It takes us everywhere we need to go, kind of south of us. And, our bus stop was shot up. Middle of the day, it was 12:30, I think, about 6 months ago. And it was a drive-by. I think somebody was definitely hurt. I'm not sure what ended up happening to him. And this stuff is scary. I'm not going to be the person to say that, it isn't scary. I don't understand. I'm a little confused how the new proposal, ties into stopping the gun violence. I understand that, when you have human trafficking, as they claim, and the pimps who have, weapons, and it might be related in some way. But it sort of seems like this proposal is I don't know. Is it like trickle up crime and punishment? I don't understand it. We always talk about how police are going into places with guns that maybe they shouldn't need guns. Somebody's having a mental health crisis. Why? That was a whole conversation, right? Mm-hmm. But now we have an issue where people have guns and they're shooting those guns on the street. And now the police are going to go harass the sex workers. Yeah. And I'm just I'm not saying that there's no connection between the two, but it sort of seems if the whole argument is we need police, let's have the police with the guns go after the people with the guns.
Okay, I want to hear from Saul, but Lauryn, you report on criminal justice issues, among other things, at South Seattle Emerald. Do you have any more to say about what's behind this this stay out of prostitution area zone, and any thoughts on what would be the effect of it?
Yeah, I just want to say that I want to acknowledge what Andrew said about people who live there, because I think that, people who live in those neighborhoods are part of the group that is closest to the problem. And I do think that we need to listen to them when they say that they fear for their lives. But at the same time, I think it's important to acknowledge that this policy is authoritarian and it only seeks to further divide our society by treating addicts and sex workers as second-class citizens, by creating literal areas where people who have been charged with misdemeanor drug offenses or crimes related to prostitution cannot go. So if these zones are on the way to like necessary services for these people to get out of the situation that they're in, they will have to circumvent around them in order to get to where they need to go, which will only further inconvenience the lives of our homeless neighbors and the people that this policy will be affecting. I don't think it will improve public safety. I don't think that they will be successful at what they're trying to do, but if they are successful at keeping people out of these soda zones, as they are called, I feel like crime will only be concentrated to the areas outside of the zones because people will be, forced to be in those areas. And I think that might create further public safety issues for the people that live outside of those zones. I think that we're failing to go up the river and we're continuing to do nothing to address the root causes of these issues.
Okay. Saul, Seattle has had laws like this in the past that got repealed. The city council back in 2020 essentially took the advice of researchers who said, it's criminalizing, in effect, poverty. It's hitting, some racial groups more than others. They were repealed in 2020. But you told me you think these approaches on drugs and prostitution are spot on. Why is that?
Well, a couple of things. The law in 2020 was repealed by a pretty leftist city council, but it also focused more on the sex workers. And this law is going to focus a lot on the customers. We shouldn't be blaming the sex workers as much as we should be blaming the customers. And they know that if they go to this area, they're going to find sex workers. So this is a way to try to stop that, number one. Number two, I respectfully disagree with Andrew about the nexus between the shooting and the prostitution. The shooting is pimps shooting at each other to protect their territory. That's what the shooting's about. And so if we can make this territory a non-prostitution territory, there should be less gunfire.
How do you know that?
I want to...
Well, that's what the police are saying. I haven't personally done it. Now, I was the focal deputy when I was King County prosecutor, deputy prosecutor for all child prostitution in King County. And this is back in the dark ages. But at that time, that was certainly an issue. And I'm assuming it's the same issue now.
I feel like it's related, but it still sort of seems like if the issue is like, so we talk about public safety, like, and again, I again will concede you definitely have more information on this than I do. So I'm just going to tell you how it feels like kind of in my neighborhood. Like, I don't personally feel unsafe in my neighborhood. Maybe that's me. Maybe I'm oblivious, but I live my life. And for some, because my life isn't entangled in some of these issues, I generally do feel safe in my neighborhood. I know a lot of people get upset when they see the visual signs of a neighborhood that they would describe in decline. And one of those might be when you drive along Aurora around Lowe's, you see a lot of sex workers. It's something that people don't like to see in their neighborhood because it sort of represents something. But those sex workers don't make me feel unsafe, and again, I just kind of go back to like, there might be a connection here, but doesn't it sort of seem like we're, I'm so bad at analogies, but like, let's say that we have a lot of traffic deaths on Aurora, right? Because there's too much speeding. And so you say, okay, Kathy Moore, we're going to go after the speeders, right? And she says, no, we're going to go after like the illegal food trucks because people are speeding to get to the food trucks. It's like, okay, well, there's a connection there, but can we go after the people who are shooting the guns and who are speeding first?
And if I may interject, I just want to respond to Saul's point about it being repealed by a leftist council. Then Mayor Jenny Durkin supported it as well, and she's been known to not have the most leftist policies. So I just feel like this is just another situation where we're suggesting criminalization, as Andrew said, as a solution to systemic failures with root causes that need to be addressed. If we had the capacity to provide adequate treatment for sex workers who are engaging in that behavior to support, say, an addiction, for example, and provide them with housing and jobs post-treatment, we would see better outcomes when trying to get people permanently off the streets and away from traffickers. Outside of blackmail and brute force, the power that traffickers have over their victims is the ability to elevate their material conditions. So if we think of like a capitalist society as sex trafficking. The way society is supposed to work is that your employer is your quote unquote pimp. And for the services, quote unquote, that you provide your employer, you're entitled to compensation from them, which is supposed to support you by providing you with all the material conditions that you need to live. Except employers are no longer able to do that because wages are not keeping up with the price of inflation and the affordable housing crisis and other issues that people are not able to support a life for themselves. So the bottom line is, if we want people to stop engaging in sex work, we need to eradicate the need for sex work by improving the material conditions of the demographics of people engaging in sex work before they get a chance to interact with the pimps who are promising those material conditions to elevate their lives.
I agree with you. I think helping these sex workers with all their issues is critical, and I think if we don't, we're not going to solve the problem.
Yeah, so I think it all is wrapped up in that need of, they're shooting out to protect territory to get to sex workers. If there was no need for sex work, none of this would be happening. So I feel like people need to go up the river, as I love that analogy, love using it, to find out why there's so many sex workers.
Oh, can I ask you? We're going to talk about actually some related things, but a bunch of good questions have come up here. So Saul, as a former King County deputy prosecutor, what do you have to say to first the idea of why, instead of cracking down on crimes that we think are related to, in this case, prostitution, or we could say drug use, is it possible to? We already have laws. Prostitution is already illegal. Drug use and drug sales is already illegal. Is it possible to address a criminal issue by focusing only on that specific crime?
Well, certainly not. It's got to be a comprehensive approach.
But isn't I associate Republicans with sort of this anti-big government, nanny state. Do you have any concerns about issues where they don't even have to have been convicted of prostitution or a drug crime? Even if they've just been charged, they'll be prevented, could be as a condition of their release, their pretrial here.
Right.
You can't do this otherwise legal activity in this area. How do you feel about that?
I feel good about it. I think that somebody is arrested for selling drugs in a certain area. Let's have that person not go back there.
Yeah.
I don't know why. It doesn't seem complicated to me.
Okay, so then number two, before we move on, Lauren's getting at, you went way upriver. We're talking about capitalism and raising people's material conditions. Also, on the question of the law, these laws talk about wanting to provide services to help people with their issues, but they don't provide money to do that. Do you actually expect? What do you expect from these laws? Do you expect criminal activity to just be someplace right over a few blocks over, or do you expect people to get any help with their issues just because of the more of the criminalization?
Well, they're going to have to provide funds to treat these people. Also, the new law attacks the customers. It's not about attacking the sex workers. It focuses on the customers. But we're going to have funds directed toward these people, or they're just going to go to Shoreline. So, which is where they were before Shoreline put in these policies and stopped it happening in Shoreline.
And I think I read today that Kathy is going to push for funds. Kathy Moore is going to push for funds down the line. I think I saw a line in her press release about that. I don't know if you guys saw that.
Okay.
Either.
Well, we'll see if funds come down the line. We know the city is has a big budget debt, and where are they going to get the money? And that's much to discuss on future weeks in review. Before we take a break, though, since we're talking about a system that's underfunded, clogged, staffing shortages. Seattle cannot book people arrested for misdemeanors because there's nowhere to put them. And the King County Jail says it doesn't have the space or staff to do it. Seattle City Council member Bob Kettle says it's not enough to jail people only for felonies.
The bottom line in our city, and this is what our neighbors are feeling, is that there is a staggering amount of misdemeanor crime that in the whole is having massive impacts on our neighbors, and it's having massive impacts on those individuals that are in need. And that's where our focus need to be.
So the city is considering reserving 20 beds at a jail in Des Moines. Lauren, we've reported on this. Why not? What's the downside of that?
I think the most egregious part is the fact that it will be $100,000 per bed that they would be spending, because the contract as it stands for the rest of 2024 is $600,000. But then if they decided to renew for 2025 onward, it would be upwards of $2 million. So $2 million per year for 20 beds is $100,000 a bed. I don't think that is a good use of funds. Also, we're only talking about holding people there for 24 to 48 hours. So it's going to be a constant cycling of just 20 people, because I forget who said it, but it was a city council meeting the public safety committee meeting that they just had. A resident of the downtown area, she might have lived in Belltown, not too sure, but she had said that on average, there's about 140 people out using drugs in public in the 3rd and Pike corridor. So we have 20 beds. There's still going to be about like 120 people still out in public using drugs. So you're not going to see that, doing much for public safety. So I just think that it's completely a misuse of funds. I think it's worse than the SPOG contract. I think that community members' concerns should definitely be taken into consideration. As I said earlier, I think we do need to listen to the people who feel like it is unsafe for them in their own neighborhoods. However, if they feel unsafe going about their business and they live in buildings, it's probably so scary for someone who's experiencing homelessness for the first time and does not have some of the coping mechanisms that you develop to deal with what you see on the street after being homeless for a while. So if people who are living in their buildings are feeling unsafe going about their business on the street, imagine how our neighbors who are constantly on the street feel. So I think it's important for us to remember and to consider that as well when we think about public safety.
Anything else on the score? That's also we haven't even got into some of the. Some people have died in this. Facility. There's a lot of controversy. There's gonna be a full city council vote. Were you saying something, Saul?
I was just going to say that this is not just focused on drug users. This is focused on things like assault. We can't have a situation where we arrest someone for a crime and we can't incarcerate them if we're afraid they're going to flee or danger the community.
I was surprised. We'll take a break here in a moment. I was surprised to hear. I heard a well-known criminal justice reformer, Lisa Dugard. She won the MacArthur Genius Grant for creating you may have heard of LEAD, Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion, which is all about sending people to services rather than jail. So she's not a fan of mass incarceration. She was on the podcast Seattle Nice, and she said that she actually doesn't like the city not having the option of booking misdemeanor arrestees because she thinks it perpetuates the idea that we have crime and disorder because we're not jailing enough people. And she said we should just if we're going to have a carceral system, we should make it work so we can see if that idea is false or not and whether we need to invest more in services.
So people can die in jail and not be on the street.
This is a big discussion
It
that
is
the
a
full
big
council is
discussion.
going to consider.
I mean, I don't want to cut you off if you're going to jump in there, Saul, but I was just going to say it's really tough. Like, again, just as a person who hasn't gone to school for this stuff, like, I am not somebody who thinks like we can just live in a society without any jails. Like, there are people who are going to be a harm to themselves and to others and to society and will continue to do so. I do think we have a lot more opportunity in our society, though, to turn some of these people into better citizens who aren't going to do that. But I don't think the system we have set up right now does that. We're talking about, I've been avoiding the word recidivism because I have a bit of a lisp and it's hard for me to say. But thank you. I appreciate that. You guys can see me dancing around that word. But
that's ableism.
Thank you. We obviously need to do something with bad characters and bad actors who are continuing to be a threat to other people. And how we approach that, we're going to have different ideas about that. But when we look at a jail system where we've seen it has been disproportionately racist in a lot of ways, and that is like kind of, I don't have the answer to those systemic problems, but like this issue is littered with that and with that baggage. And I don't know how we get to the other side of that. But I had mentioned to you guys off air that like one of the details of one of these people who had died in this jail had been there. I think this was his 18th time. I think the article said he had been there 17 times before. And I just like read that line. I was just like, 17 times. Like, whatever this isn't working, right? Like if you're there 17 times, it's not working. I don't have the answer for what is, but that just sort of struck me.
Well, what kind of society would we be if we can't incarcerate people for committing crimes? So we have to find a middle ground.
No, I did say I'm not saying that I'm somebody who doesn't believe we shouldn't have that ability.
I think it's important, though, to say that we're not just talking about crimes in general. We're talking about misdemeanor level offenses of using drugs in public, or what else goes under
punching somebody in the head.
Yeah, what else goes under misdemeanor offenses? But a lot of what people are coming out and saying at these city council meetings is that they're tired of seeing people on the street using drugs, right? That is what has been the concern, and they're tired of the gun violence associated with that, with dealers. They're tired of all the traffic that it creates, the sex offenses that it creates with that. So all of the issues that people are bringing up seems to, from me, as someone who doesn't live downtown, seems to be coming from this issue of public drug use and all of the chaos that comes around with that. So if we're going to have a carceral system to just lock people up, rather than dealing with what we all believe to be the root cause is this issue of rampant addiction and drug use, why aren't we just dealing with that?
We've got to, that's a big question. And it seems like we discuss this in different ways on every other show, right? And so a big conversation to continue. Will these laws pass? Will they move crime from one place to another? Will they deter crime? Will they help people? Will people get help with the issues that lead them to these behaviors? We'll keep following that. This jail contract is also going to go to a full council. Those laws I mentioned, the stay out of drug area, stay out of prostitution areas, all to be considered by the city of Seattle, and we'll follow it for you. Let's take a quick break and come right back with more Week in Review.
Hey there, I'm Katie Campbell, the voice behind the KUOW Book Club newsletter. That's right, a twice-monthly email newsletter devoted to books from the Pacific Northwest. Read along and enjoy analysis and other exclusive content from the KUOW team. Learn more and subscribe today at kuow.org/books.
Support for KUOW comes from Third Place Books. Sci-fi duo James S.A. Corey launched the first book in a new series, The Mercy of the Gods, Saturday, August 10th at 7 p.m. Tickets available now at thirdplacebooks.com.
Hi, I'm KUOW's Libby Denkman.
And I'm KUOW politics reporter Scott Greenstone.
And we're the hosts of a new podcast. It's called Sound Politics.
We're here to help you understand the people, policies, and perspectives that shape the Pacific Northwest.
You can find Sound Politics on the KUOW app or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is KUOW's Week in Review. I'm Bill Radke, and I'm here with my panel this week. We've got from Gamoran Legal Consulting, former King County Deputy Prosecutor Saul Gamoran. We've got the co-host of Too Beautiful to Live podcast, Andrew Walsh, and South Seattle Emerald's reporter and writer Lauryn Bray, talking about what happened this week, including Boeing naming its new CEO, and he's not going to be based in Chicago, and he's not going to be based in Northern Virginia. He's going to work right here in Jet City. Does anybody remember Jet City? Kelly Ortberg is a mechanical engineer, ran an aerospace supplier. He's coming out of retirement, and industry analyst Richard Abolafia sounds thrilled.
I don't think you could ask for a better candidate. He's got a deep background in the industry, and he recognized the importance of both the workforce and the supply base in successful company execution. It's the exact opposite of everything that Boeing's been suffering from for quite a few years now. This could be the turnaround story of the century, to go from a culture that just focused on manipulating financial abstractions that was completely dysfunctional. Kelly Ortberg comes from a place of, a deep technical background and a wonderful sense of how an aerospace company should be run.
Wow, Boeing hasn't been talked about this in this way in quite a while. Turnaround story of the century. U.S. Senator Maria Cantwell is happy Ortberg will work in Seattle. In fact, she said, Boeing, just move your headquarters back here. Quote, when it comes to quality and safety, being close to the workforce on the ground matters. Saul, you said you're not holding your breath?
That's right. I'm not holding my breath. They've got a long road ahead of them. and it's not going to be easy, and I think it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. But I would say this guy is highly thought of, highly respected, and they're going to give him a lot of runway to get this fixed. And I'll also add that I think the Seattle aspect is not just a coincidence. I'm not saying they're going to move the headquarters back, but I don't think it's a coincidence that they chose Seattle.
Andrew, are you holding Saul's breath?
I am. Do you need it back, Saul? I don't really know if this is more of a symbolic victory. Obviously, kind of the breathless praise for Kelly seems good to me. I mean, Boeing has a lot of stuff to figure out. Bring the astronauts back.
Yeah.
I'm worried about those guys up there. But I don't have any insight on this other than let's be hopeful that it is a turnaround. I mean, the way this has been set up, that's a lot for Kelly to live up to, man. It is a lot of praise right now.
Lauren, you haven't lived here that long. Are you very attached to Boeing headquartered here or anyplace else?
I live by there. No, I met a guy that worked there, and it was funny because he didn't want to say he worked for Boeing. He said, "Oh yeah, I work in aerospace engineering." My mom was like, "Do you work for Boeing?" So yeah, I just hope that, they'll work to address some of their labor concerns within the company about people feeling like they're overworked and that their concerns weren't being genuinely heard or considered when taken to higher ups. As we know, this has caused many safety concerns, creating headlines each time. Every time a Boeing aircraft malfunctions, hashtag bring the astronauts back.
Hey, we're getting it started.
Yeah. So
for those that don't know, Boeing Starliner space capsule went up, and they still haven't come back. This is the first crewed mission of the Starliner, and they've been at the space station for almost 2 months.
It's not looking good. Hopefully the new CEO, though, will be willing to listen to some of those safety concerns, implement new changes, and that the company's internal administrative issues that have led to some of these engineering problems will be minimized. Sorry. I guess him living in Seattle is supposed to suggest that he'll be closer to the ground on this issue.
Right. I don't know. We'll see. Get the astronauts closer to the ground on this issue.
Can I say something? I'm just going to say this. I'm just going to roll the dice on this. This is super rude. I really shouldn't say this, but I was traveling in Arizona about 2 months ago, I think, and I was taking a lot of rideshare services back and forth from places, and I was getting a ride, kind of a lengthy ride, about a 40-minute drive, from a fella who was super, super nice, but one of the dimmest bulbs on the Christmas tree I've ever met in my life. And then we were kind of chatting some more. This is so rude and so unfair. But then he mentioned that he works for Boeing when he's not driving, he does something very specific in a Boeing factory. And I was just like, oh no, I got to take a Boeing flight back. I did not love the idea of this guy kind of attaching things to an airplane that I was going to fly on.
My late father, Boeing worker, rolling in the grave.
I'm sorry. That was so rude. That was so rude. I know that there are that is not a representation of Boeing workers. I'm just saying, in this one moment, as I sat in the back of this fella's pickup truck, I was momentarily nervous about my flight home.
Yes, understandable. Sadly understandable. Well, that's a large business. Let's talk small businesses now. A Seattle City Council member wants to help restaurants by letting them continue to deduct tips from the minimum wage they pay workers. This is a deal that restaurants struck a decade ago when the minimum wage was starting to really rise, and they didn't want to pay that higher wage and also let staff keep tips on top of that. So the city agreed to phase it in. So smaller businesses had 10 years of crediting tips and benefits partially toward the minimum wage. Well, that's set to expire soon, and restaurants have lobbied the city to keep their exemption. And Andrew, you said you can understand why labor groups are hacked off.
Yeah, and just the people who work in the industry. A big problem, as I see it, as Seattle becomes more and more expensive to live in, is the people who are working these restaurant jobs can't afford to live in the city that they're working in, and that really bums me out. As somebody who really loves this city and feels like I didn't grow up here, and I feel really lucky to be able to live in Seattle and Seattle proper. I kind of have a lot of pride about that, and it kind of bums me out when I think that I'm going to a restaurant and the people who are potentially serving me in my favorite city of Seattle can't afford to live in the city proper because it's so expensive here. And this was a deal that was struck between business interests workers and labor interests and the city council and everything, and it was negotiated in good faith. It was tied up in all of the minimum wage negotiation going on at the time, and they said, well, we're going to do the restaurants and the small businesses a favor by giving you a 10-year ramp up. But of course, when you give somebody a 10-year ramp up, you don't know what's going to happen in 10 years, and it just seems like
pandemic might come along.
A pandemic might come along, and a lot of things, and the city council could take a huge turn to the right, and so and that is life, and I'm sure the negotiators knew that at the time that was a risk, and they took it. But it would certainly, if I was somebody negotiating in good faith now, I would certainly remember the great, and it hasn't happened yet, but if it does, the great pullback of 2025.
The great pullback. Saul, I'm guessing you are okay with businesses and we're still feeling effects of the pandemic and inflation, as are workers, like we all, meaning businesses, workers, all of us. Are you okay with this deal? Andrew said it was struck in good faith. Now it's time for businesses to pay a full minimum wage. What do you think?
Well, we've had 10 years to look at this. I think what's being proposed is just for small businesses.
Yes.
And I guess my issue is how they define small businesses. They define it as 500 employees. So that's not really that small a business.
I thought so too.
I'm more focused on the mom and pop diner or the small family restaurant that has 20 employees or 40 employees or something like that. I think we got to give them a break.
But they've had a break for a decade.
Right. Well, just a second. I'm not asking for more of a break. I'm asking them just to continue what they're having now and not raise the minimum wage $3 on them, because it could make it or break it. And we're seeing restaurants go out of business. So my approach would be to allow an exemption for truly small businesses and go and see how it goes from there.
Well, you know what I'm going to say.
Yes, Lauren?
I would say that if we had a city council that truly committed themselves to business like they say they do, there would be some sort of fund for these small businesses to pull that money out of instead of paying for a new jail. But that's all I got to say.
Well, why would they pay the businesses?
Well, because if they really genuinely care about, so one of the things that is being said about the public safety issue is that people don't want to leave their houses to go to businesses. So if they genuinely cared about the thriving economy of these businesses, they would do something materially to support them while they go through these really horrible things. So if we're not going to do actual solutions to public safety, and if we're going to continue to create policy and allow businesses to leverage the cost that they're supposed to be allowing their workers to have off their workers' wages off their workers' tips to compensate for that wage increase that they have to pay, it's going to be beating down in the same issue, essentially. So I think that if we wanted a concrete solution to this, and if we had a city council that genuinely cared about business, as they say they did, they would probably divert some of this funding maybe over to something like that.
I guess what I'm thinking is that we're not talking about cutting anyone's pay. We're just talking about not increasing it again.
But so, yes, but if I'm thinking about like what's going on with DoorDash too, because to me these issues are very connected, even though like DoorDash is a huge business, and I know that we're going to get there soon.
Can I fill in for listeners who may not be
Let's
following all this? So DoorDash, this is another big, as you say, a big business labor fight right now is over delivery drivers' wages, earnings. The old city council had said that companies like DoorDash, Uber Eats, Grubhub, Instacart, they needed to pay drivers more, and they needed to pay them a minimum wage. Well, DoorDash responded by adding a $5 regulatory response fee. Well, customers ordered less food, which DoorDash and some drivers have complained about. So the new city council's been considering lowering that driver minimum wage. DoorDash is sick of waiting for that to happen, and they just imposed yet another fee. $2 more for long-distance orders, $2 more for Dash Pass subscribers. So we have this standoff on whether Seattle is or is not going to enforce its rising minimum wage.
Yeah, and to me that's connected to this issue because we're essentially demanding that these corporations, these businesses pay their workers fairly, and they're trying to leverage the costs elsewhere. So with this legislation, the way that I understand it is if we have to pay you a minimum wage, we're going to take from your tips, which I feel like is unfair. And so I don't know. I think if we allow businesses to stiff arm their workers and create this policy that hurts them in the long run, we're literally just perpetuating these issues.
Can I ask you guys a question? I'm legitimately interested in how you guys feel about this, and if you because this has been tumbling around in my head for the past couple of days, and I want to know how you guys think of the way I'm going to frame it here, and I'd really appreciate it if you told me I am describing it incorrectly. But when I think of tipping, I think traditionally we think of we're tipping the person who served us because we got some sort of extra service or whatever. Like, the reason I'm doing that is to say to the server, thank you. I know you're getting paid for your job, but this is above and beyond because I appreciate what you've done for me.
Because you didn't just give me a box of something. You you had all these options of whether to treat me this way or to be helpful, to be quick, to be whatever it is.
Yeah.
So yes, it's a different thing.
And it's up to the customer to decide how much that is. And so you get into some, kind of gray area about, well, who's the person? Did they just get into a fight with their partner before they walked in here? You're leaving so much up to the situation, right? Mm-hmm. And so just leaving my opinion about this particular legislation off the table, it sounds like if we go through with this, we just need to reframe how we think of tipping. And we're not tipping the server, we're tipping the business. We're subsidizing the business so that they can pay their workers a living wage, right? Like, we're literally tipping the business, right?
Well, if you don't base your tip on service, particularly one way or the other, it's just you're just doing 15%. That in effect, that's what you're doing. Do you think tipping will go away as the minimum wage in Seattle, as the minimum wage rises? And businesses are saying, well, if we're going to pay a higher minimum wage, you're going to see it in menu prices.
Yeah. Well, in Europe, they don't tip because they pay their workers a fair wage.
So do you think tipping goes? People have been complaining about tipping more and more and more in recent years. Are we ready to be done with that and be Europe? I was just in Japan, no tipping.
I'm the type of person that if I ask for a lot, I'm going to tip you more. I'm always going to tip, but I'm going to tip you more because I know that I'm asking for a lot. So I think it comes from this internal, gratuity that you genuinely feel for the people that are doing things for you. So I don't think tipping will go away if people get paid a decent wage, but I also don't think that it's fair for businesses to take those tips to leverage the cost of those wages, because I think that the intent is to give it to the service person.
Well, going back to DoorDash for a second, the minimum wage, they have to be paid that minimum wage. If DoorDash isn't making enough money and they want to put on a $5 charge or a $50 charge or a $1,000 charge, people can use DoorDash or not use DoorDash, or maybe it goes out of business. They ought to be able to do anything they want to do in terms of raising the prices. And
they can and did.
Yeah.
Right.
And people stopped using DoorDash. And the drivers, they complained about the lack of orders on the app. And I'm not sure if DoorDash complains about it hurting their pockets too much, because DoorDash is a nationwide company. They're able to contract with other cities that don't have this legislation, but I don't know.
So did you finish your thought about that, Saul?
Well, I was just saying that back in the 90s, there were all kinds of crazy internet companies, and one of them was a big delivery company, started with a K. I can't remember it.
Was that here in Seattle?
Yes,
I've heard tell of this. Yes.
And I mean, it was great. It cost nothing. You get ice cream and pizza and everything. And what a shock. They went out of business. So if these DoorDash type companies can't make it work, they can't make it work. I'm not in favor of inflating salaries to make companies unprofitable. But when it comes to minimum wage, we're not talking about a lot of money.
And also, for whatever it's worth, and I'm not arguing anything here, but DoorDash, I looked it up today. Like, they only had one profitable year, I think, in their history, and that was like the peak of the pandemic, I think. So yeah, they are trying to figure it out, And again, like, I was actually kind of curious. How do you guys feel about it? What if DoorDash goes out of business? Like, we've had this, like, I didn't grow up with these services. Excuse me, old man talking. But like, I just, I grew up in the country too, in Ohio. So like, we would drive 30 minutes to get a pizza and eat it when it's cold, or every now and then on a special night we might call, and some delivery person would bring it. But like, for me, the idea of sort of, ordering it via these third-party apps is kind of new to me. And at first I kind of loved it and really leaned into it. But then as the fees started to rack up more and more, I'm like, well, I'm just not going to use it anymore. And I've kind of stopped using it. Do you guys think it's like actually bad if these services go away? Is it bad for workers? Is it bad for the economy?
No, they should put DoorDash out of business. And let me tell you how they could do it. They should unionize all of the workers that do like delivery. They should unionize, create their own situation where they contract with restaurants and deploy themselves. We don't need DoorDash.
Well, I like DoorDash.
Yeah, you use it?
Well, I use the other apps too. And I just think that now in two-income families, these are popular. But the pandemic's not coming back, God willing. And they're never going to be as exciting as they were before.
Some beloved Seattle restaurants have been shutting down because Andrew Walsh stopped hanging out there. He just ordered from DoorDash. Are the remaining Seattle restaurants too annoying and off-putting for a regular Joe and Joanne and Andrew? Stay tuned when Week in Review returns.
Today on The Daily, the secret fight in a Nevada court over control of Rupert Murdoch's media empire. The outcome could influence how much of the world sees the news. I'm Sabrina Tavernisi. That's today on The Daily from The New York Times.
Today at 2 on KUOW.
Support for KUOW comes from
The Museum of History and Industry, presenting Towers of Tomorrow with Lego bricks, on display now through September 29th, featuring skyscrapers from around the world, constructed in architectural detail with Legos. Visitors can construct their own towers. Info at mohai.org.
Needs to change.
Saul and Lauren were just agreeing with each other partially, as we often do, because we said it. I think we said it the last time this group was together. We agree on a lot of things, but not everything. You're listening to Week in Review. That's Lauryn Bray from South Seattle Emerald. Andrew Walsh here. He is too beautiful to live. I hope he gets less beautiful because I really want him to live. And Saul Gamoran from Gamoran Legal Consulting. And so we were just talking about food and costs. We're talking about struggling Seattle restaurants. And Andrew, you are struggling to find a restaurant that's not pretentious.
After all this talk, let's remember who the true victims are here.
Really?
And it's me when I want a slice of pizza. You know, this is a story that I saw in the Seattle Times earlier this week, and it really kind of broke my heart. A little bit of background here. I think some people in Seattle especially North Seattle, will remember the North Lake Tavern, which I don't even know what name. It's like between Wallingford and the University District, and it was like an old, like kind of cozy old. The first time I walked in there, maybe 10 years ago, I was like, oh, it felt very nostalgic to me. It seemed it was a tavern, there's a bar, but like, you know, a big dining room with like checker cloth tables or whatever, and you could sit in a big booth and eat a slice of pizza and everything else that made me feel like
did they have
young
plastic
and safe
pitchers
again.
for beer and ice water?
I think they did.
Yeah.
I literally think they did, and so of course that gave me all the feels, right? And then I think it was about a year ago, I saw the news that it was closing, and that bummed me out. But I'll be honest, like, again, maybe I was to blame. I didn't go there enough or whatever. And I was like, oh, no, they're going to close and it's going to become some pretentious place. Like I said to you guys, it'll be called like Wood Plus Fire Artisan Pizza, where we deconstructed and reconstructed and it's, you know, whatever. And I was so happy to see that Big Mario's, which is like kind of a local, I guess you'd call it a chain, a local, you know, chain of restaurants and pizza shops around town that I really like the vibe of just personally. I saw that Big Mario's was taking over a North Lake Tavern. And I'm like, that works for me. That works. It's not, they're not going to like, it's not, I'm not going to go in. It's going to be all like cold steel and like, I don't know, like I just can't.
Artichokes.
Like, exactly. Like, and so, and like people saying, have you dined here before? And it's like, no, but I've dined before. Like, I don't need to know about the charcuterie boards. Like we get it, you know? So anyway, this is just me kind of being an old cranky, I guess, anti-foodie, but I was so excited when I saw that Big Mario's was taking over. And I guess less than a year in, the experiment has apparently failed because I opened up the Seattle Times and I saw that Big Mario's is now going to sell the place, and we don't know what's going to happen to it. So I sent you guys just an email rant about like, can't I just get like old-fashioned food anymore? Does it all have to be super boutique-y and precious? But again, we're talking vibes here, and maybe I just need to let the younger generation do what they want.
Well, how do you know when a place is too precious?
Well, you can usually tell by the name, right? Before everything was something plus something, it was always something and something, right? Like Barnacle and Anchor, Barnacle and Anchor or whatever,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And you go in, and again, not to repeat myself, but the key is always when they ask you, have you dined with us before? Because they always think they're doing something differently. I'm like, well, is this one of those situations where I look at the menu, choose what I want to eat, and then ask you if I can have it and you bring it out to me? Then if so, like we can get right to that.
I've essentially dined here before.
Yes, exactly.
But
Right.
I'm always down to hear a special. So
Yeah,
like when
that's
I hear
true.
that, I'm expecting to hear a special. If you're not telling me anything other than a special, I don't want to hear it.
Yeah. I'm glad you're with me. I
Just
feel
come
so
out and
old
tell me
right
what
now.
the special is. You don't have to ask me if I've darkened your doorstep in the past.
Any recommendations, Saul, of places I can go and still feel alive?
I do, actually.
Good.
I just had the best meal of my life.
Ooh,
Wow.
tell me.
The Herb Farm. I never went there before.
Herb Farm? That sounds
Unbelievable.
precious.
Yeah, it does
Is that
sound
in
so precious.
Woodinville?
Unbelievable. It's in Woodinville.
Okay.
I
yeah.
had the best meal of my life
What
there.
was it?
It's too long to say, but I'm just saying
All
it
right.
was wonderful. I was full, and the service was a 10. It was just fantastic.
Nice.
It's expensive, though. Yeah.
It is expensive.
But it looks good.
Does the
But
E-line go there?
You asked the question. Yeah, the E-line goes there. But you asked about a good
no,
meal.
no.
I'm just recommending it's
Yeah.
top of mind. That's all.
Yeah, we were kicking around before the show about like diners that we like to go to. I've been kind of like in that mode too, like looking for. I think I mentioned Flo-Ann's, which is sort of in Lake City, and you can find little diners kind of peppered around, but not those old school diners like you might get in like L.A. or New York or even Cleveland where I grew up.
Hey, speaking of old school, just let me work in some headlines before I ask you what to smile about at the end of the show here. It's almost over. Just some things we haven't mentioned. The Stranger got sold.
Yeah.
A Seattle company bought it and called Noisy Creek. The biggest shareholder is former state representative Brady Walkinshaw, who told KUOW he plans to expand the newsroom and, here's the old school part, quote, I'd love to see us expand print, bring more print issues back in the newsstands, back into coffee shops. I see it a lot like vinyl. You're seeing record sales and vinyl again. And in many ways, what's old is new again. We see a lot of audience demand for physical copies of the papers, close quote.
Nice. I hope it works. I don't know what their financial model is, but if I can, as a consumer, support it, I will.
Okay, another item, the Belltown Hellcat is in custody, infamous for driving his souped-up, striped-up Charger loud and fast downtown. He got charged for that, and also incidents with his ex-girlfriend, alleged stalking. And anyway, a judge banned him from posting to Instagram or Twitch, and we'll see what happens with the Belltown Hellcat. The Mariners traded for a couple of veterans, an infielder and an outfielder, both of whom can occasionally hit a baseball. So it could be a culture clash there with the fellow players. But
Well, they could hit baseballs. They're Mariners now, Bill.
So it's all going to change. And finally, so I'll begin with something that made me smile. Yesterday, I was sitting on the tarmac at LAX, and the pilot came on and said our flight would be delayed because of the Blue Angels, who were practicing 1,000 miles from where I was sitting. And that caused some kind of delay, according to Alaska Airlines. So it was nice to know, even though I was away from home, I could still be inconvenienced by seafaring. Did anything make you smile this week?
Simone Biles, oh my God, the USA gymnastics team winning gold. It was amazing watching her performance. Also, Jordan Childs, she is very talented as well.
Where's Jordan from?
She's from Vancouver, Washington.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Olympics watching. Good. That's good stuff. Anybody else smile this week? Besides the herb farm, I know did it for Saul.
Yeah. Oh, I'll just throw. This is going to seem very obsequious, but I'm dead serious. What made me smile was Sound Politics. You guys just, You guys just released a new podcast. I consider Libby Dankman to be a friend of mine. I didn't even know she was working on this, so I guess the state of our friendship is in question. But honestly, the podcast is so good. It's exactly what I needed in my feed. So if people haven't checked it out, check it out.
Thank you, Libby, who's fantastic, and Scott Greenstone. And I mean, politics is
So
what I
good.
want to hear about. And
Yes.
KUOW's. It's called Sound Politics. It's a new podcast. Thank you. Yes, Saul.
The Mariners are in first place in August.
Yeah.
That's fantastic news. One more month and I get to have pennant fever.
By the way, I also read in KUOW's daily newsletter that some rare shark species got discovered in Puget Sound. And Dyer Oxley, who writes it, pointed out that between that and the Blue Angels, we now have Jets and Sharks. So if you want West Side Story jokes and news updates, that blog is called Today So Far. He also mentioned that there's a new, you've seen Lime e-bikes and scooters. Did you know there's a new in-between? There's a new, Lime has some new wheels that's like a lighter version. It's called the Lime Glider. It's like a bicycle, but it's smaller, it's lower center of gravity, it's lighter, and there's no pedals. It's just the thumb, on the handlebar. So it's something in between, and so if you're I resist them personally. I'm not a fan.
I've seen some injuries, so I'm good.
But for those who if that makes your life better, go for it. We gotta go. I want to thank you.
You sound surprised.
Darn.
I feel kind of wistful, I guess is the best word for it. I got to go out and hear the Blue Angels. But I want to express my appreciation for the last hour, Lauryn Bray. Thank you for being on the panel.
Of course, anytime.
From South Seattle Emerald, reporter and writer there, and Saul Gamoran. You're not King County Deputy Prosecuting anymore. You're legal consulting and coming on Week in Review, so thank you.
It's my pleasure.
And Andrew Walsh, you could not be more beautiful. I'm concerned about its effect on your livelihood.
Yeah, sure.
Too Beautiful to Live podcast co-host with Luke Burbank. Andrew Walsh, thanks everybody for being on our show today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening or for watching. If you would join us on YouTube and search for KUOW there. Thank you to Kathy Faulkner running the soundboard. Week in Review was produced this week. I was in LA half the time. Zeki Hamid stepped in and produced the show. And we get social media and live streaming from Juan Pablo Chiquiza and more support editing, producing from Hans Twite. I'm Bill Radke, and we have a date 1 week from now.
Support for KUOW comes from the Recreational Boating Association of Washington, encouraging all who use Lake Union to mind the seaplane advisory zone. When yellow lights flash on the line of buoys, a seaplane is about to take off or land. Lake users are asked to move 200 feet away. More at